Give us your full name.
Yeah, George Garland Beasley.
Okay, and where were you born at?
I was born in Patrick County, Virginia, and that was April the 9th, 1932.
Okay. And tell us about growing up. Tell us about your family.
Well, I had the misfortune of losing my father when I was about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of age. He was burned to death in a hotel fire. And my mom, my sister and I moved to live with my grandparents, Mr. Robert H. and Phoebe Epperson up in Ararat, Virginia. That was on about a 100-acre farm, and I had the good experience of enjoying pigs, chickens, beef cattle, things of that nature. We grew our own vegetables, and was one of those kids that just couldn't wait for the early green peas to come in. You know, they tasted so good, the way my grandmother prepared them, and it was a simple life, but I think if I had it to do all over again, I think I'd want that kind of life. I'd want to experience a life like that. And so it was all good, that's all I can say.
So did you attend local school while you were there?
I did. I attended what we called a one-room school in grades, I think I made the first and second grades in 1 year, and then I went back to that same school for grade 3 and 4, and then transferred to a school called Blue Ridge School, which was grades 1 through 12. But the little school, which was called Clark's Elementary, was only, I don't know how many students we had there, but it couldn't have been more than 50 kids just from the local community.
Yeah, so a small school. So after that, was there a high school that you went to?
Yes, Blue Ridge High School, and we had grades, I think the high school, if I recall, was grades 9 through 12. But at that point, there were 12 grades in the school, whereas just a few years prior to that, there were only grades 1 through 11.
Mm-hmm.
9 through 11, 9, 10, 11. I think 8, 9, 10, and 11 comprised the high school, and grades 1 through 7 was the elementary. But when I got there, maybe by 1 year, I had 9 through 12. And
what year would that have been? Do you remember?
Oh my. I started in high school 1946, 47, 48, and I finished in 49.
In 49?
Yeah.
And you went through 12 grades?
Went through 12 grades.
So what were you interested in high school?
You know, growing up on a farm, I used to walk out in the backyard and look up the hill, and it was kind of a slope like this. And I'd look up across the field, and I'd just wonder, what's in life for me? I wonder what it's going to be like. Am I going to be on this farm? Am I going to be growing tobacco? Am I going to be a lumberman like my grandfather? Am I going to go to the army? Am I going to do, I don't know. I just wondered what the future was going to be. But after working in those tobacco fields for a few years, I one day paused and I said, Lord, is this all there is in life? Isn't there something else out there that I don't know about? And if there is, I pray that you're going to lead me to that. And thank God he did.
Terrific. So after you got and graduated from high school, what happened next?
Well, after high school, I wanted to go to a 4-year college, but, excuse me a second.
Go ahead.
We didn't have enough money. So I went to a business college. It was called National Business College over in Roanoke, Virginia. And we concentrated on primarily business colleges and business English and things of that nature. But then after I completed what was called a junior accounting degree, there wasn't much demand for my work. The only thing I could do was keep books, and there weren't too many people in Mount Airy, North Carolina that were hiring bookkeepers at that time. So I knew that I had to have something else. Didn't have any more money to go to school. So at that point, the Korean War was still in progress, and I thought, what the heck, I may as well join the Army. And when I get out of the Army, I'll have the benefit of the GI Bill of Rights, and I'll be able to go to school, maybe to University of North Carolina or Appalachian or whatever the case might be.
Wow.
So went into the Army, joined the Army. They sent me to Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky for basic training. I did that, and you remember they give you all these tests when you're in service. They're aptitude tests, and they're very good. They want to determine what you're really best fitted for. And so they made a decision, meaning the Army, to send me to the cryptography school down in Camp Gordon, Georgia. It's now Fort Gordon, but they called it Camp Gordon at that time. So I went through the cryptography school, and after I'd completed it, they pulled me aside and asked if I would like to be a teacher in the crypto school. And of course I jumped all over that. I told them I had never taught, knew nothing about teaching. They said, don't worry, we'll send you to school. And they did. They sent me to a school to teach you how to teach the Army method there at Fort Gordon. And it was about, I think, a 12-week school. And after that, I came back to the crypto school and taught there for, I don't know, I taught there for several months. And then for some reason, they sent me up to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And I stayed at Fort Devens a while, and then got transferred back to Fort Gordon, where I remained where I stayed for the remainder of my career in service. But some good things really happened. Two good things. Number one, I met Ann in Augusta. I met her in September of, I'm trying to remember what year it was. Ann, what year did we meet? Is it okay if I ask my wife?
You can certainly ask her. Yeah, I don't know if she's within range or not, but...
What? 53.
We met 53 or 54?
We got married in 54.
Okay, we met in 1953 at Fort Gordon, and then we got married in 54. We got married on July the 20th, 1954, and then our first son was born August the 15th of 1955.
Wow.
Yeah. But
And was that Bruce?
no, that's Bob.
Oh, Bob. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Well, I don't know him.
Yeah, well, Bob is the only one who didn't choose broadcasting. Bob went to the University of North Carolina, and he had a double major, a major in chemistry and a major in broadcasting. So he chose to become a medical doctor.
Wow.
And he's practiced medicine for all these years. But he comes around the house, and he always talks about how he could fit into broadcasting, how much he thinks he could contribute to the business. And I really think he could contribute a lot to it. But medicine is his field, and he's very, very good at it. And if he ever chooses to get into broadcasting, we'll find a place for him.
Well, let's go back to you just getting married. You've had your first child. What happens then? Do you take advantage of the GI Bill?
Well, after I got out of service in December of 1955, I went directly to Appalachian State University. It was Appalachian State Teachers College back then.
Uh-huh.
But I got out on December the 10th, enrolled in Appalachian. No, excuse me, I got out December the 7th, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and enrolled in school at Appalachian on December the 10th.
1955.
1955. And I went straight through, right on through, took the summer school, kept going right on through until I got my bachelor's degree. after I got my bachelor's degree, I began work on my master's, but I took a job at Low Gap High School up in Surrey County, North Carolina, where I taught, I think high school, maybe high school English for 1 year, and coached girls basketball.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was an experience.
Had you had any coaching experience?
No, I hadn't had any coaching experience. I really hadn't. There was a friend in the county, in Surrey County there, that by the name of Swanson Richards, who was coaching over at a school called White Plains. And Swanson would give me a few tips from time to time, but he also had his own team. And then, although I had much better personnel on my team than he had, he proceeded to just whip the fool out of us when we played.
So you're teaching school, you're coaching a women's team, and but you've had some good training in the service. You've been an instructor there.
That's right.
In
Teaching
cryptography.
wasn't a problem at all. I enjoyed that.
You did very well. What happened then?
Well, we had a summer picnic up on the Blue Ridge Mountains up there at on the Parkway someplace, and it was hosted by a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Price from Stewart, Virginia, and he was an equipment salesman, and he did that once a year. And so while we were at this picnic, dinner, whatever it was, I met this gentleman by the name of Raymond Rickman, who was principal of Dan River High School in Danville, Virginia. And he and I began talking. He had had a heart attack, but a nicer gentleman I've never met. I've never met a nicer gentleman in my life. He was the best. And so he asked me if I would consider coming to Dan River High School as assistant principal.
Oh.
And of course I asked him what the pay scale was, and it was about $1,500 more than I was making at Low Gap. And so I said, absolutely. And he said, not only that, I don't live in the principal's house, which is right in front of the school. We'll let you live in the principal's house for free.
Oh, wow.
So I jumped all over that situation and accepted the job. And that summer, in July, we were off to Dan River High School in Danville, Virginia.
So, George, about what year would that have been? Do you remember what year you moved there?
I think we were there 59, 60, 60, 61, 61, 62.
Now we're getting close to where a frequency comes available for an AM radio station. How did you find out about that?
Well, let me give you a little background on that. My uncle had an AM station in Mount Airy, North Carolina.
Oh, you had mentioned Mount Airy before.
Yeah.
And his name was?
I'm sorry?
What was your uncle's name?
His name was Bob Epperson.
Okay.
Yeah. Robert Hennis Epperson, everyone called him Bob. But at nighttime, I used to go to his station, and I'd stay there for maybe 2-3 hours and just talk radio. And he led me through the process of applying for a radio station. He told me about what it would cost, and on it went. And then I had a cousin by the name of Ralph Epperson who had a station on the other side of Mount Airy.
And I knew Ralph, and I was just going to ask you if Bob might be Ralph, but in fact, they were related.
Bob and Ralph were first cousins.
Oh my gosh. And they both had radio stations in Mount Airy area.
Actually, Ralph had the first station there. Ralph probably was the inspiration for all of us, meaning Stu Epperson, all of us that got into radio from that family. No doubt Ralph was the inspiration.
Wow.
But anyway, I visited Ralph's station on a few occasions, and Stu, although younger than me, did work in the summertime on Ralph's station as an announcer, and he was very, very good, by the way. But after I moved to Dan River High School, and while I was there, and my uncle had helped me to get this application in for the station in Benson, North Carolina. The application had been there for about a year, and it wasn't going anywhere.
Nobody was interested.
Well, no, the thing is, the commission hadn't acted on it, and I didn't know why. And one day Stewart came to me, and he had just started his station in, just outside of Roanoke, a little place called Vinton, Virginia. And he had just I think just put it on the air. And he came to me and he said, George, he said, you know, you're going to have a lawyer if that application goes through. And he said, I found one that's pretty cheap up in Washington. He said, for $250, I can get him to help you to get your application through the commission.
Wow.
So Stu went with me to Washington, not on one occasion, but on 2 occasions, to help me get that application ready so that the FCC would grant it.
And who was the attorney?
A gentleman by the name of Abe Stein. And I'll never forget my first visit to see Abe. It was on the 8th floor of the Warner building in Washington, D.C. And it was about dark that evening, and we'd been talking for a while. And Abe looked at me and he says, you know, you're not the radio type. You're the scholarly type. Why don't you just go back to your high school and keep right on teaching or whatever it is you do, and let the radio people do the radio. He said, you don't fit in that. You don't belong.
Wow.
And he said, look out the window there. And it was getting dark, and he said, you see that man walking down on the street? And he said, and I said, yeah, I barely see him. He said, well, he's got more business sense than you've got. Stewart began laughing, and he looked at Stewart and he said, Stewart, you don't know anything either. He said, go home and learn from your brother.
Oh my gosh.
So Abe just basically buried us at that point. And I didn't know what to say, but you know, I just kept persevering with him.
Yeah.
So he decided to help us, and for the $250, he helped me get the application through the FCC to build the station.
Terrific.
But once the application was granted, building the stations was something else.
What did it cost to build a station in those days, do you think?
Well, let me tell you how this one was built.
This is 1961.
This is 1961. This station was built by buying a little piece of land for $700 to put a shell home on that was traded out with not J. Walter homes, but another one that's of the same type. So we traded out the building, and over a 3-year period.
And they were going to get ads on the radio
And they were
station.
getting ads on the radio.
Oh my, you didn't even have the radio station on the air yet, and you'd already traded a home.
Well,
wow.
He made us borrow the money and pay him. Made me borrow the money and pay him, which I did from First Citizens Bank. But he did run the advertising like he said he would.
So he took the money and ran the advertising, so you had income.
So we had income. Yeah.
Great.
And it all worked out pretty well.
Now let me ask you a question about Ralph Epperson's radio station. Did he do a live radio show back then, like he did in later years, the Saturday merry-go-round?
Yeah, Ralph did that merry-go-round from, I guess, the time he started his radio station.
Live music show every Saturday.
Right on until he passed away.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Again, Ralph was the inspiration for Stewart, for everyone of the family that's gotten into broadcasting.
He was a terrific guy.
He was a terrific person.
Well, let's go back. Your station that you're building out, you've traded the building out.
Yeah.
How'd you buy the equipment?
Bought the equipment from a company by the name of Gates Radio Company. They usually required 1/3 down, and so I met with a gentleman back and forth, and met with the Collins Radio Company also, which was a competitor. And so I just kept trying to get a lower price, and a lower down payment. Now I finally got, I think it was 10% down.
Wow.
And at that point I worked a deal with the people from Gates Radio, and so they were very good.
George, you recall what it cost for equipment to start a radio station?
I think $17,000.
$17,000.
$17,000.
So you had to have $1,700 down.
Had to put $1,700 down.
Wow. That was a lot of money back then.
That $1,700 was drawn down on the line of credit that I finally got. Getting that line of credit took me 3 months.
Wow.
It took my stepfather signing the note, and it took also my grandfather signing the note.
Oh my gosh, and this was through First Citizens?
That was actually through First National in Mount Airy, and then First Citizens afterwards. First Citizens agreed to take the note over afterwards.
So you got the building, you got the equipment.
Yeah.
How long did it take you? How long do you have once you're given the construction permit to get the station on the air?
You know, it's been a while since I did one of those things, but I think they gave you a couple of years, something like that.
And you were able to do it within that period?
Oh, yeah.
So when did you go on the air? When was your first day on the air?
December, I think it was the 1st of December, 1961.
1961, December 1st, you went on the air and the call letters were?
WPYB.
Did that
We promote your business.
Back then, call letters stood for something, didn't
That's
they?
right, they did.
We promote your business,
Yeah.
WPYB.
Yeah.
And where were you on the dial?
We were just about as far to the right as you could go. They call those frequencies graveyard frequencies, but it was 1580 on the dial.
And you
500 watts.
Daytimer only.
Daytimer only.
So you could only broadcast from sun up to sundown.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And in the wintertime, with all that skywave interference, sometimes you could drive about 12, 15 miles before the signal went out.
Now, you were assistant principal at a high school.
That was in Danville, Virginia, but once I got the permit for the station down in Benson and got it on the air, one Saturday morning, I'd left from Danville to drive down, and this was after we got the station on the air, and I drove by the superintendent's office over in Smithfield, North Carolina, just with the hopes that I might just be lucky enough to catch him in. And honestly, if you don't believe in fate, this will tell you that fate really works, because when I drove by there that Saturday morning, the superintendent was in. His name was Evander Simpson. And I walked in, introduced myself, and told him that I was looking for a job in Johnston County, that I just put this little radio station on the air, and where I was working up in Danville, Virginia, as an assistant principal. And his comment was, "Well, we don't have anything open." And but we began to talk. He had been discharged from the military, as I, and we both had served in the Army, and we had a lot in common, and we talked for perhaps an hour. At that point, he said, "Well, you know, there might be something coming up down in Benson, North Carolina, at a little school just outside. It's actually 7 miles outside of Benson." And he told me a little bit about the school. It was grades 1 through 12, and asked if I would be interested in that. And I said, "Well, sure, if it comes open, I'd certainly be interested." Well, that was on a Saturday. I got a call from him on Tuesday, and he said, "Could you come down to Benson and meet with us at the school, at Meadow School, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock? I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Simpson, I'll be there." And I got there at 7 o'clock, met with the local school committee, and 2 days later, I had a job offer.
Oh my gosh.
Now,
Wow.
we're talking about fate.
Absolutely.
It kicked in that particular instance. I got the job, and when school was out at Dan River, we moved right down to Benson. They had we moved to Benson. They had a house for the principal to live in.
Oh, wow.
A brick house, a very nice little house. And Ann and I moved from this house it was where I lived as assistant principal up in Danville, with air coming up, no underpinning at the house, none whatsoever, air coming through there. We had this old warm morning heater that heated up the place for us, but believe me, we were cold. She'd sleep with one child and I'd sleep with the other.
Oh my gosh, wow.
And so that was an experience.
So what year did you move to Benson?
We moved to Benson in the, I guess it was the summer of 1960. Was it 62 or? And did we move in 61 or 62?
Probably 62.
62.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
62. Yes.
Yep. Okay.
I need to confirm these dates with my wife.
I think that's a good idea, and I'll tell you, she's a good sounding board too.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah. So you've gone to Benson. Now, what about the radio station?
Well, a gentleman by the name of Jim Harrelson had moved in there as the manager of the station. He had been hired as a manager, and I had promised him some equity in the station, or had it set up so that he could earn some equity if he came in, but we hadn't decided on any amount or anything. So we worked it out. He got equity in the station, and we worked together for a number of years after that. When we sold Benson, keep in mind that was a very, very small market. I think maybe 20-some hundred people lived there. But we built the station between Benson and Dunn had about 7,500 people.
Much larger, yes.
So we probably did 2/3 of our business out of Dunn and 1/3 of our business out of Benson.
Wow.
But Jim proved to be a good manager. We got along well together, and we bought the station in Goldsboro together. If I remember, Jim owned, I'm trying to remember, I think he owned maybe 40% of Goldsboro, and I owned 60. And we later started a station in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I think I owned 50% of that, along with a gentleman by the name of Dewey Foster, who was an insurance man in Spartanburg. And so Jim lived in Spartanburg, and I swapped in my 50% of the Spartanburg station for his 40% of the Goldsboro station.
So you now own Goldsboro all by itself?
I owned Goldsboro by myself.
Now let's talk about that a minute. That was WFMC.
WFMC.
And that was an upgrade. You had a 500-watt daytime station, but WFMC was a more powerful station.
WFMC was 1,000 watts, 730 on the dial, one of those low dial frequencies, and it just went out forever. You could carry it right on through Raleigh. It was a good radio station.
Great step up for you, your
Great
second
step.
station.
And when we went into that station, we really shook it up. It had a combination of everything on it, the way it was being programmed. It had a certain type of programming in the morning until 9 o'clock, and then it had another type of programming until noontime, and then from noon to 1, something different, and then something different from 1 to 3, and just one of those MOR stations, a true MOR station. That was the designation that we gave it back then, a middle-of-the-road station, because it just had everything on it.
And so was there music, live programming?
It was live programming, but I had this guy working for me from New York, and he was probably one of the best radio men I've ever seen in my life. He had a problem. His problem was alcohol, and as long as I could keep him sober, he was as good as, I'd put him up against almost anybody in the state of North Carolina when he was behind the microphone, when he was thinking about sales, when he was thinking about anything that had to do with radio. He was certainly a very, very smart man.
And this gentleman's name was?
Bob Utley.
Bob Utley.
Utley. And he had many radio names. He had one called Bob the Ramrod. He had one called Bob Wilson. And then he had one called Big Bob something. I can't remember, but on and on they went. But everywhere he went, he did well.
And you liked the Goldsboro community?
I did like the Goldsboro community. You know, when we were in Benson, on Saturdays, I used to just get in my car and drive around. And one Saturday, this guy, Jim Harrelson, who was with me in Benson, and I drove over to Goldsboro. And it was in the spring of the year, and we drove down, I think it was Walnut Street, one of those streets where all those dogwoods were in full bloom. And it was just simply beautiful. And I told my wife about it. And so we went over there on a Sunday, and she thought it was nice too. And so I met with a gentleman by the name of Ken Marshall and talked to him about WFMC. And he was an aged person at that time, almost as old as I am right now. But that's when I thought 80 years old was old. Yeah. So I talked with Mr. Marshall, he wasn't interested in selling, but I kept in contact with him, and I said, you know, if and when you decide to sell, please give me a call. And one day, out of the clear blue, he called me at Meadow School and said, look, my partner and I are considering selling WFMC. I went over, met with the two, and we put a deal together.
Great.
And that was it.
Wow.
Yeah. So we actually bought Goldsboro before I quit the school business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I stayed on for a couple more years in the process of consolidating all the high schools there in the southern part of Johnston County, and so Meadow was one that was being consolidated along with Benson and 4 or 5 others.
and as I recall, it seems like you left the education business in mid-1969.
I don't recall if it was mid-19. No, I think I left it at the end of the year.
Okay. Okay. But 1969.
Yeah, in 1969. Yeah. I left it. When you say mid-69, it was mid-69.
Yeah, because it was the end of the school year.
Yes, the end of the school year.
Which ends in May.
I'm thinking of the end of mid-school year.
So that would have been right.
Yeah,
and
so June.
In the meantime, you have not only your bachelor's from App State, you've got a master's.
I think I had completed my master's at that point. Yes.
Yeah.
I surely had.
So now you're in
and
the
had
broadcast.
begun work on a doctorate.